Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to the Arboricultural Association headquarters in Stonehouse in the UK for our webinar tonight. My name's John Parker, Technical Director at the Association. Hello! You should all know the drill by now. Use the chat to say hi, let us know where you're watching from, but please select all panelists and attendees before you do so. Questions just to go in the Q&A button. Don't put them in the chat because I won't see them. And other than that, just sit back and have lots of fun. Whilst you're enjoying this evening's presentations, you might like to think about signing up for next week's webinar, which is all about succession in the arboricultural sector. We'll be looking at how we can secure the future of our industry by attracting more people to work in arboriculture. What barriers are there to starting a career in trees, and how can we overcome these challenges to ensure a diverse and engaged next generation of arboriculturalists? Excuse me. We'll be joined by Luke Fay of Tree Work Environmental Practice and Michelle Ryan, Chair of the Arboricultural Association and Senior Arboriculture and Landscape Specialist at Transport for London. The link to register will be posted in the chat. Michelle is also chair of the Women in Arboriculture group, which is busy running a series of very successful and popular virtual coffee mornings. The next of these is tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. UK time, and the topic of discussion will be well-being and self-care. Hugely important subjects which we should all be thinking about and which I think we'll be talking a bit about today. If you're a woman in arboriculture or you're a woman interested in arboriculture and would like to join the virtual coffee morning, then the link will appear in the chat soon. And there's also one next week on January the 28th. Other than that, I'd just like to say, please think about all of those other things that I always say to think about. Please check out our Tree Care Supporter website at treecare.org.uk and take a look at all of the public-facing information that we're offering. You might like to sign up as a member of the association, and there's plenty of different options available for that. And if you're not a member of the association and you're not a Tree Care supporter, but you enjoy these webinars and you'd like to help support the work of the association, then you can, of course, always make a small donation to the cause. We're a charity as well as a professional body. This evening, we will be exploring the topic of living with greenery. This won't just be about trees for a change. It's a lot wider than that. And we're very lucky to be hearing about two exciting case studies which should provide much food for thought. You'll soon be hearing from Lauriane Chalmin-Pui about a recent study by the RHS and the University of Sheffield into the relationship between green front gardens and psychological stress, something more pertinent than ever in the current pandemic. But before that, our first presentation takes us to the rooftops of Cairo. In December 2018, I was very fortunate to attend the first ever World Forum on Urban Forestry in Mantova in Italy. There were many, many presentations over the few days that we were there, and a handful really stood out as being very exciting and inspiring projects. And one of those was a version of the talk and the speaker you're about to hear. So it's my great pleasure to invite Abdallah Tawfic to the stage. Abdallah, over to you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, John, for inviting me today to this session. I'm very happy to be with you today. I'll just quickly introduce myself to the audience. My name is Abdallah Tawfic. I'm originally an architect. I did my bachelor's at Cairo University, and I worked in conventional architecture for almost 7 years. When I discovered that I want to do something different, I wasn't convinced 100% with commercial architecture work in my country, and specifically in my city with lots of urban challenges. I traveled to Germany to do my master's, so I hold a master's degree from Hafen City University in Hamburg, and I studied resource efficiency in architecture and planning. And my master's thesis focused on the topic of urban agriculture and rooftop farming as a multi-beneficial tool to support informal settlements of Cairo. After receiving my master's degree, I traveled back to Cairo and I worked for 2 years at the American University in Cairo, and I was managing a grant to implement community gardens in different informal settlements of Cairo. So I was lucky to have the chance to link between theory and practice and focus and work on the topic of my study. After leaving the American University, I co-founded Urban Greens Egypt, which is a startup aiming to promote the concept of urban agriculture practices in Cairo. And I'm currently also working full-time at the German International Cooperation, the GIZ, focusing on implementation of basic infrastructure projects in 9 informal settlements of Cairo. I'm also partnering with the US Forest Service. They have an international program, and with supports coming from experts from Davy Institute, we are developing also an interactive tool for mapping of different rooftop gardens allocated in Cairo using surveying software similar to i3, if you know about it. Me, with the support of professors from the American University in Cairo, we have founded the Egyptian Rooftop Gardens Alliance. So we're trying to have a collective network of rooftop gardening practitioners, academics, owners, suppliers, or even interested individuals with the aim of sharing knowledge and ideas about rooftop gardening in Egypt, and even collaborate on a bigger scale and work on national projects if this is possible. One of my hobbies, I write sometimes. I write in 2 online magazines, The Nature of Cities and The Urban Activist, which are usually exploring different urban-related topics and highlighting stories happening in our cities all around the world. Regarding that, I'm also inviting all of you to attend or be a part of the Nature of Cities Festival. It will take place virtually all around the world between the 22nd and the 26th of February. There will be different presentations, micro talks, dialogues, art, and music as well. So look it out on Google, look for Nature of Cities Festival, and check it out for more details. I will be highlighting some of the practical work today and reflect on some personal experiences that I had during my urban agriculture work with different communities. But first, I would like to take you quickly through the urban patterns of Cairo, the city I live in, which is considered the 2nd largest city in Africa. Actually, Cairo has been dealing with a persistent challenge that originated in the early 60s, which is the spread of informal settlements. This phenomena has been growing rapidly due to the fast rate of population growth and complemented by internal migration. Since the government of Egypt usually focuses its efforts to develop Cairo and neglect other small cities in terms of basic services and infrastructure. And this drives people to migrate in search for better living conditions. Also, nowadays, the government is still, they are unable to deal properly with the spread of the informal settlements or find a real or a rooted solution to control the growth of such phenomena. Actually, today, informal settlements represent more than 60% of the Cairo's urban footprint and accommodate more than around 17 million inhabitants, meaning that it has transferred to a dominant urban fabric at the time being. When we compare satellite images through time, we will find that Cairo has not been only growing in the east and the west of Cairo. This is like following the Egyptian dream to invade the desert and build new satellite cities. But actually new patterns of urban agglomerations are growing and expanding in the north, and specifically the delta of Egypt. And this urban expansion is eating from the breadbasket where our agriculture activity is focused and concentrated. There's continuous encroachment on existing agriculture lands around Cairo. And this increase is happening as a result of the leniency of the government also in dealing with violators, which pushes and drives more people and landowners to follow their lead without being afraid of penalties from the government. So the history of this, how this transformation happened in the early 60s, those lands were purely for agriculture activity, and they were divided according to the agriculture basin subdivision. And adjacent water canals were used to irrigate those lands. Through time, those lands were inherited to more people and fragmented into smaller plots. And by that, people started to abandon agriculture, as it does not provide a decent income anymore. Small plots of land with probably not a lot of production. That means that no decent income for the individuals anymore. So the solution was to invest in this piece of land by either building a small house for the family, and some floors can be leased and provide a source of income, or maybe directly selling the land to a local contractor who also wants to invest, of course, and build on it. With the absence of urban planning regulations, in this case, maximizing the built-up area is important, of course, to gain as much revenue as possible. So construction boundaries were set on almost 100% of the plot, and the previously used water canals are no longer used for irrigation of lands. So unfortunately, it transformed through times. People start throwing garbage, and it transformed to landfills. Through time, this led to a compact constructions of houses stacked together from three sides with no any kind of minimum setbacks. Only one elevation is free, and through time, those canals were converted to streets. So basically, this is the original story for every informal settlement in Cairo that was built on previous agricultural land. And this incremental building transformation through time has led to a serious phenomena of unplanned urban communities. As you can see, the difference between three plots of land in the 50s and how it turned out through time with the absence of proper urban planning. This led to the vanishing of agricultural lands in areas of previous agriculture origin. This is an aerial view of Imbaba that was considered the feeding zone for Cairo in the 70s. Since it was very near to the River Nile, the main source of fresh water in Egypt, and it was also very near to downtown Cairo, and the land was very fertile and good. So this land nowadays has transformed into one of the most dense populated urban hub with minimum to almost zero green spaces. Cairo is facing big challenges with the availability of green spaces. So 40% of the total numbers of Egypt is concentrated, are found only in Cairo, which is a huge percentage. Studies has also shown that Cairo is one of the lowest countries in the world in terms of green spaces per capita. We are less than 2 square meters compared to the minimum of 9 square meters, which is the recommendation of the WHO for a decent living condition. So we're far away from the minimum. Egypt is also facing an alerting challenge with freshwater resources. So we fully depend on the River Nile, which represent 95% of our resources, and the other 5 are limited to underground aquifers. And with the rapid increase of population, Egypt is considered a country suffering from water scarcity, with a share less than 600 meter cube per capita per year, which is absolute scarcity. More than 80% actually of our freshwater resources are consumed in agriculture. And unfortunately, we still use old techniques like flood irrigation, which is a non-efficient way of utilizing water. The impact of the pandemic. The pandemic is making life more difficult for Egyptians. The unemployment rate has jumped by 2% only in the last 6 months, which is the highest rate since 2018. It's happening alongside the government measures, of course, to prevent the spread of the virus, which is still leading to a decrease in demand for laborers and the dent in the Egyptian job market. In Egypt, more than 5 million people work as day laborers in the informal economy, usually without any kind of social protection. And currently the government has officiated a decree to deduct 1% of all the net salaries from public and private sector workers. And it will be dedicated to a disaster response fund for the upcoming years to support different sectors in need of any kind of support. The tourism, of course, and the travel sector also contributes to a decent percentage of the Egyptian GDP. And with the current travel restriction, the tourism sector also is facing a decline in activities. The global trade will also, the decrease in global trade will likely have an impact on the industrial sector in Egypt, which is heavily reliant on the raw materials which are imported from China. In Cairo, green spaces are considered the least important use of the land, since there is so much pressure on land use than just adding greenery. This is just the normal mindset here, unfortunately. So 2/3 of the existing green spaces in Cairo is provided by the private sector inside gated communities. And the other 1/3 could be found in either private sports club, with another small percentage of this 1/3 you can find in public parks, which is a very small percentage. Usually in the urban planning of any neighborhood in Cairo, there is always provision for green spaces. However, reality is different. If you go now to visit a space that was supposed to be designed as a garden or a green space, you will see that lots of them have been converted through time, unfortunately, to either coffee shops or parking lots. And those two photos, unfortunately, informal areas has the least amount of green spaces compared to nearby neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods are like a few walking minutes away. That means that even the less than 2 square meters per capita that I have mentioned is not evenly distributed among the tenants of Cairo. With the pandemic, I guess even the access of the urban poor to the limited existing public green spaces are becoming very hard, since the government is still, of course, closing public parks, which are already very limited. And there is a plan to open them again with limited capacities. And I think it's making it even harder to fulfill an urgent need for more public and green spaces in the city. The government also nowadays is closing any pop-up local markets. Pop-up local markets in Cairo is very popular. It's a very popular activity in lots of local neighborhoods. The local markets are usually the main source of income for locals living in informal areas, and they are also considered a compensation for lack of open spaces for the tenants. So they usually walk around and buy their essentials and chat with their neighbors and practice different types of social connections. Unfortunately, even the perception of different communities is unfortunately changing towards the importance of green spaces, since there is a lack of basic infrastructure and services. A recent survey that was done in Cairo on the importance of spending time around green spaces showed that it is still perceived as a luxury, which is understandable, of course, given the living conditions. But also I add to this the absence of strategies for proper green space management in the city, and the lack of policies and governmental support for green spaces provision in Cairo. The government is also currently more concerned with solving traffic issues in Cairo. So right now there is an approach to convert public green spaces into wide asphalt roads, serving only vehicles, with no consideration to the value of the trees that are removed or the walkability, of course, of the neighborhood. Some neighborhoods were very active. There's lots of social activities that shape the urban fabric of those areas. And unfortunately, those areas has been converted into asphalt with an increased percentage of crossing accidents. So among those challenges, we are left with few possibilities of reviving the loss of green spaces in our cities. So roofs could be one of a few potential spaces in Cairo and a starting point where we can rebuild a culture that promotes the importance of urban green spaces. So our aim is to basically convert gray concrete slabs into functional urban gardens that can benefit our communities socially, environmentally, economically. And we're trying to change the local mindset into realizing the potential and the opportunities they can create when practicing urban gardening. So I'll move from theory a bit. I'll walk you through a practical experience of a project that I've been working on. This project was funded by the European Union and German international cooperation. This project is named Sustainable Community Gardens Owned by Successful Communities. And the main objective of this project was to implement 5 sustainable community gardens and train 30 community members in one of the informal settlements of Cairo. So I'll take you through the rationale of this project, how we dealt with it, what are the challenges, how did we deal with the people and everything. So the first step for this project was to select 5 locations where we want to implement this project. As you have seen previously, in informal areas, they are like huge, they are big. We don't know where to start from. So we decided to utilize a document, which is the participatory needs assessment. It's a document that was created by the German international cooperation. And in this document, we had a recommendation for spaces where they think that might be a potential where we can start this kind of activity. So we utilized this and we visited some location and we created a selection criteria for this. So we have a checklist of technical point of views that we have to make sure about when we visit those spaces. We want to make sure that this space is accessible. If we're talking about a roof, we want to make sure that there is proper solar exposure for planting activities. We want to make sure that the space is safe. There is proper guardrails and parapets. Also, since we're planning to plant those spaces, there should be a proper water and drainage sources. And of course, the load-bearing capacity of the roof and the insulation of the roof. So this was like a big checklist that we used to deal with when it comes to checking out the place. But we didn't only want to focus on the technical criteria. We want also to integrate this with the social criteria. So we want to talk to the people. We want to make sure that those people are interested in agriculture. They will have time for the trainings and the implementation and the management of such intervention. And we also had a very important point. We focused that on gender equality for this project. So we wanted to have at least 50% of our participants to be women. So after evaluating some spaces, we came up with 5 selections, and those were 2 public schools. One of them is a school for girls. The other is a school for deaf and mute. And we have 2 public entities, a public library, an educational authorities premises, and we have an NGO. So those are the 5 selected locations that we started targeting. The second step for our project was to create the community gardens team. So we visited those locations, we explained the projects, we told them, let's have a memorandum of understanding and clarify the objectives of this project and identify the roles, like our role as an implementing arm and your role as a grant beneficiary. And we asked them to select 6 members from each location whom will be trained and who will be in charge later on of handing over this project to. After this process, the next step was to train those 30 community members. So we had an intensive 2 weeks course. The first week was a course for garden implementation and management. So we gave them the basics of how to create a rooftop garden, what are the types of systems that you can use, how can you plant, the basics of planting, harvesting, pruning, fertigation, and we also exposed them to some national and international models of rooftop gardening. So this was the first week. The second week, we wanted to integrate this project with this training with a social and green entrepreneurship training. So we want to introduce to them some marketing tools on how to properly market for their produce, how to create a business model canvas, how to think beyond only this space and expand this project if there is a possibility to do so. After the training, we went back to our offices. We previously surveyed those spaces. So we started to design those spaces. And we didn't want to only have the input from our perspectives. So there was a communication between us and the owner of the locations. So we wanted to include them in the early decision making. So there was a back and forth, lots of back and forth when it comes to the design until we reached a design that satisfies their taste and needs. Next step was to implement the 5 community gardens. And when implementing, we had a different methodology. We thought of a collaborative implementation. And by collaborative, we mean that the 30 community members will collaborate together to implement the 5 gardens, not each 5 or 6 members will implement only their respective gardens. We thought about this for 2 reasons. The first was to increase their hands-on experiences. So their technical experiences were increased because, of course, implementing one rooftop garden is, of course, different than implementing 5. They will gain more experiences. The second point was to increase the social bond. They all live in the same neighborhood. They are walking distance from each other. We want to create social connections between them. Of course, if I come and support you in implementing your garden, you'll have to do it and come and support me when I implement my garden. And then there will be lots of chats, and this kind of social bonding we want to support and help the community to deal with. So this was how we created this kind of collaborative implementation. After the implementation was our part to do periodical follow-up visits. So, of course, directly after implementation, there's some technical issues that we have to deal with. There's handing over. Now they are on their own. There is handing over. So we tried to do some periodical follow-up visits, and this periodical follow-up visits decreased through time. So we want to give them the sense of ownership, gradual sense of ownership for their spaces. And of course, we don't want to lose contact with them. So we decided to create WhatsApp groups with the teams so that they can also share any kind of questions anytime there is a technical issue or they want to ask about how to deal with a pest or how to properly fertigate their plants. So this is the easiest way to deal with the team that has previously implemented this project. We also thought that if we were going to, one way or another, leave this project, we have to create something of a manual that can support the team in terms of operation and maintenance. So we created the best practices manual, and it was in Arabic. And we've put all the ideas and the thoughts and even the contacts of suppliers so that whenever they need any kind of support, they can open this manual and they can use it for their support. When we started this project, we thought of a structure for this project. So we basically want those local entities to collaborate with the donors to hire technical companies, and those technical companies will implement those rooftop farms and train those rooftop farmers. And the task of the rooftop farmers is to manage those farms, and whenever they have surplus of crops or they have crops, they can deliver this to a farmers market unit under the umbrella of this local entity. And there is also a financial unit that can help take over this produce and sell it and pay the rooftop farmers. So this was how we proposed the structure of the project. And we had also a future structure of the project. We want to create an autonomous entity. So we thought that through time, our hands can be slipped away from the project, and it will be only a quick supervision, and then a project management unit can be implemented under the umbrella of those local entities, where also a technical unit can be created that can train more rooftop farmers and implement also another rooftop farms to help disseminate this concept among different other community members. Regarding the components of the garden, so we ensured that those components are easy to implement, easy to maintain, easy to replicate, and light in weight. Those are the most important aspects. We want this ideas to be replicated elsewhere, so we thought of the price, we thought of the materials that we want to use. So since we're working on the roof, we want lightweight things. So we thought, let's go with soilless planting systems. And we have two types. The first is container system. So this container system is available in three types. The first is the half barrel system. So we basically brought complete barrels, and we also purchased previously used barrels. We don't want to purchase new barrels. So we want to promote the concept of reduce, reuse, and recycle. So let's purchase the used one. We cut them in half and we clean them properly, and we create a PVC stand. And then you have a system, a container system that can handle up to 6 seedlings. This was an idea that was welcomed by the community. We also introduced a tree barrel. So this barrel, you can plant a tree and you can prune it in a proper way so that it doesn't get very long and create an issue. We also thought of utilizing the parapets. So we thought, why not we buy PVC pipes and hangers and then put PVC pipes on the parapets and plant herbs and flowers in it. So that actually adds to the value of the roof. So this was our ideas in terms of systems, container system. We also introduced hydroponic systems for them. We introduced different types of hydroponics, NFT, nutrient film technique, and deep water culture. And those two techniques, the hydroponics and the containers, are water efficient systems. So we introduced drip irrigation network, and hydroponics recycles water, so it saves a lot of water. And this adds to the topic of water scarcity that we have. We also tried as much as we can to support the community in terms of, let's talk with the students about how to rationalize the use of water, how to support them in support maybe future people who wants to work in agriculture and introduce such ideas so that they understand that drip irrigation and hydroponics saves water compared to normal agriculture. We also complemented our planting systems with hardscape elements. So we thought of adding benches and pergolas. We want to create a relation between the people and their space. We don't want them to just go up on the roof and practice some agricultural planting activity and then leave. So we thought that those elements are very important to facilitate, promote, and encourage more activity and contact within the implemented gardens. This is one of the examples of the schools that we worked on, Al Amal School for Deaf. We proposed the design, and as you can see, some elements have been changed. They have moved some, the pergola has moved from the middle to the side, and the hydroponic system has been rotated, and it all depends on the needs of the community. But as you can see that the photo on the left was during the planting day. This was after we implemented the system, and then we did our first visit 4 weeks after, and it seems like they have grasped the idea. They were taking proper care of their system, and they planted different types of leafy crops and vine crops and herbs. This is also another example. This is another school, the Mataya School for Girls. As you can see in the photo in the top, during the surveying of the roof, there was a previous attempt actually from the school teachers. Those brown wooden tables, it was a previous attempt to do a rooftop garden, but we asked them what happened, why did it fail? And they told us we didn't have a water source on the roof, and they have to climb stairs every day to bring water in jerry cans and take it up on the roof and water their plants. It was a hectic activity for them. They were able actually to maintain such activity for a year before this project was ended. Of course, this was not a sustainable solution. So we, of course, we provided them with a proper water source, a proper pump that pumps the water properly with the proper pressure on the roof. And we implemented the design that they have requested as well. So the project has different impacts, I would say. So from an economic point of view, I think the locations were able to produce and sell different types of produce, lettuces, tomatoes, eggplants, cabbage, different types of herbs as well. And some of them, they have revenue. They use this revenue and they bought new seedlings for the upcoming planting cycle. However, since the capacity of the roof is not big, so there was also a lot of challenges in terms of how to sustain the activity, because sometimes you need more money to provide proper operation and maintenance of the roof. But at least the idea was in your mind that also the school administration has to provide financial support so that this project can continue. But we have seen that there was community initiative to expand the farms. In the photo in the bottom left, they utilized their previous benches and created planters so that they want to expand their farms. The social component was very important in this project. I think there was lots of awareness raising, not only among the teachers that we have trained, but other teachers as well were invited to the school to present different kind of activities. So they started to understand the topic and they started to ask questions, and they started to learn how to deal with planting on the roof. And we've seen some creative students engaged in farming activities and like very dedicated in such daily operation and maintenance with the school teachers. We have also seen that the dynamics of the space has changed. Like I've heard from the teachers that they now use the space for social events. So they do dish parties on the roof. So now they utilize a space that hasn't been used at all before. And adding to this, the photo in the bottom, it feels a bit weird, I see, but this was not like a guy trying to hit something on the lady from the adjacent building, but on the contrary, actually this lady was every day checking out what we were doing on the roof. And one day we had an issue with the source of water. The water wasn't properly connected to us. So she asked us to throw the hose to her so that she can connect it to her kitchen and we can have the water. And this was amazing. I told her, why are you supporting us? And then she told me, I think you're providing us with a view. Why shouldn't I support you? So I felt that, okay, the idea is changing. People are getting to understand that this is beneficial, and this concept of impact propagation, people are understanding that this concept can improve their lives, can provide them with a better view. So this is socially. Environmentally, unfortunately, the project didn't have enough fund to properly quantify the environmental impact of such rooftop gardens. Of course, we will not say that this project has led to huge carbon sequestration or did some proper decreasing of pollution, but we were able to identify different species, like we've seen insects coming, which adds to the component of biodiversity. But this project was not focused on how to quantify the environmental impact of this project. So my findings and recommendations for this project, I saw that the sustainability of rooftop farming projects, of course, depend on technical infrastructure. Technical infrastructure has to be an important component, but alongside this, people has to be interested in agriculture, so that this, or planting, this is very important. They must have the basic knowledge to deal with such systems. And of course, they have to dedicate some of their time in order to operate and maintain those gardens. I was asked a lot about the issue of economic profit. So people started asking me, hey, I want to have a rooftop garden. Will it make me rich? Will I have a lot of money? And I want to do it as a project. So actually, there is no specific answer for this question. So economic profit is subjective to different aspects. The surface area of this farm, what are the types of techniques are you using? What are you planting, and how are you marketing for those crops? And of course, it makes sense that small confined spaces will not provide you with a big revenue in the end. So there was this kind of debate and discussion about the economic profit behind selling the produce. But we have found out that new soilless agriculture technique, hydroponics, are very space efficient and water efficient, and it can maximize the yielding capacity per square meter, which is something that could be needed in this context. Also, a point that we're dealing with is dealing with residential houses. As you have seen, that most of our intervention were in public spaces, semi-public spaces. Actually, the ownership of roofs in residential areas, in residential houses, in informal areas is still problematic. We don't know who owns the roof, since the land sometimes is vaguely, you don't know who owns the land. So the roof is usually the ownership of the person who lives on the lower floor, if there is no any kind of agreement. So also dealing with this and trying to manage people who might not be very close sometimes is an issue. Like, let's go and use the roof, and then the person who lives on the last floor can easily access this, while the person living on the first floor, he has to climb lots of stairs. So he feels like, okay, I don't feel like I will do this kind of activity. So it's a bit problematic, but it's easier if this house is a family-based house, and this model is available a lot in some informal settlements in Cairo. Another issue which is missing is the impact assessment. So most of those projects are short in time, and the long-term impact assessment of those projects is very important, and it definitely will help us acquire a holistic understanding of the feasibility, the technical and social feasibility of such projects in informal areas. So I wouldn't conclude the project without highlighting the profiles of the main assets for any urban gardening project to succeed, from my point of view, which are the people. I had the honor to meet Umayya Hakim. She is a biology teacher in Mataraya School, and she's a member of the team who's still working on rooftop garden operations. She has created a team inside her classroom for periodical operations, and for planting, and another team for harvesting, and another team for selling the products within the school. And those teams rotate on those fields over the school year in order to diversify their learning experiences. I think she's also continuously encouraging her students to start planting activities at their homes and supporting them in creating a hobby that can one day turn into a bigger project or a business opportunity. Another example I have worked with is Omar. Omar is a 6th grade student who seemed like he had twisted his ankle and was approaching us during a planting workshop, limping on his crutches. He asked about the possibility of attending this planting workshop, and they told him that he has to communicate this with his class teacher. And as you can see in the first photo, Omar was listening to the instructions, wearing his jacket and leaning on his crutches. But that was only during the listening time. When it was the time to work and act, his crutches and jacket were not there anymore. He was all over the place. Not only actively working, but he was also delegating tasks to his colleagues and organizing his hydroponic system and adjusting what his colleagues have done. He wanted to make sure that the job is done right. I guess he instantly felt the ownership of the garden by creating his standards and quality control measures. And I think that the values that chose, those are the values that chose the sprouts for a potential leader and future stewards who can bring good levels of impact to the community. What I've personally learned from those models from Materere School is to work with the available resources. Those people, they worked for a year with no access of water, and they were able to succeed for some time. And I think this was inspiring to me. I also learned to stay positive. Those two models are still practicing urban gardening until today. The schools are still working and producing in spite of the holding activities. Mainly the teachers, they were eager not to stop the activity and encourage the students. They send them news and updates of what's happening in the garden. Umayya also is calling us regularly for supplies, and she's visiting her school regularly to watch her plants. I also learned not to shy away from showing skills. Omar was an eye-opener to me, and he made me think of how many of us have great skills within, but are shy or maybe not confident enough to show them. And I learned not to blame existing conditions. Umayya, she didn't put blames on the condition of the first time she failed with her rooftop garden, and she focused on the opportunity that she's having, and she worked hard on making it properly happen. I also learned not to rush results, especially with our challenging living conditions that we are facing in Cairo, and we have to be patient and look at the long-term impact. So regarding us, we are slowly resuming operations given the current situation and the second wave of Corona in Egypt. We're facing some challenges, especially that most of our work is collective and includes activities that require being physically present. We also focus our work on schools and students, and still nothing is clear about normally resuming school activities. So it's still not clear. We were also always keeping ourselves active through theoretical and practical workshops that we usually conduct at our premises. They are still also currently on hold, given the reluctancy of people to engage in activities that usually includes human interaction. We also had several partnerships with the private sector to implement community projects, but those projects are currently on hold until new safety measures are applied in the targeted areas. Also, with the unpredictable economic issues, we can see nowadays that people are more careful with their spendings, which makes total sense. So there is a bit of a desire to invest in new projects until things get back to normal. But we see the light in the end of the tunnel, as they say. We look and think of the pandemic as an opportunity to change people's mindset and perceptions towards the importance of living a healthy lifestyle, towards the importance of balanced dietary options, towards the importance of consuming more natural food that can boost the immunity and that you can easily grow on your roof or at your backyard, and that you're pretty sure of how it is grown and the quality of such produce. We also think of the pandemic as an eye-opener for us and for different decision makers on different levels to the importance of spending time around green spaces and how crucial is it for the physical and mental well-being of the communities. And how this will have a big impact on other interconnected alarming issues that we're facing in Cairo, like domestic violence and sexual harassment, etc. We also think of the pandemic as a lesson learned for all economic systems in the world to be more resilient and look into innovative strategies and efficient use of resources that can support the economy going through any kind of turbulences due to pandemics or due to any other unforeseen events. That's it for me. Thank you very much for listening. Getting back to you, John. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much. I honestly, people always think that I just kind of, talk nonsense, but I did love that project so much when I saw you a couple of years ago, and it's even better second time round. So thank you so much. We've had some really good comments in the chat as ever, and some good questions. Keep your questions coming in for Abdallah as we go along. So thank you, Abdallah. Keep your questions coming in. Keep the chat going. A few people talking in the chat. No, what am I saying? Some people putting questions in the chat, which would be better off in the Q&A part. A few people still just putting their comments to all panelists. So please select all panelists and attendees. And a few people talking about the fact that can they see the slides or the presentations later. All of our presentations are recorded and they will be going on our website in due course. So please do not panic. And without further ado, it's my great pleasure again to introduce you to Lauriane. Please, over to you.
Thanks, John. Okay, let's see if the sharing screen thing works. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. And an honor to present my research, although I think Abdallah's presentation will be very hard to go after. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK and the University of Sheffield Landscape Architecture Department. I'm based at our Wisley Garden, which is just southwest of London. And yeah, John very kindly asked if I could talk to you about my recently published research on the influence of front gardens on health and well-being, which was part of my PhD. So no spoilers here on the conclusion because it's in the title, but I'll walk you through our process. And unlike in Cairo, so quite a different environment that we're going to be looking at now, the UK is very wet. And does have quite a lot of green space actually, but it's really not valued, especially the urban green spaces, as I'll go into a bit more later on. There is quite a lot of green space in cities, and about 25% of that is in residential gardens, but it's generally always quite overlooked, especially when we get to things like public policy. Just to be clear, because I know we've got quite an international audience, when I say front gardens, it's the same as front yards. You might call them front yards, essentially gardens in front of houses that are adjacent to the street. So it's private land, but in public view. So in that vein, I'd like to start with this picture. So this was taken during the UK COVID lockdowns. Every Thursday, there was a weekly clapping event that brought the nation to their balconies, their windows, and their front gardens. It began really as a recognition of the frontline heroes, and for many, it turned into a moment of light and darkness, and it became a tool to feel connected despite the physical distance between citizens. And the front garden, I think, really took on and it really demonstrated its role as a bridge between the private and the public realms. It was a space in which people could be outside. It was a space in which they could be seen and see others. It they could connect with others, yet still be at home. Now I must say that these people do look very happy in their bare front gardens while in the midst of a pandemic that's keeping them away from their family and friends. But anyway, so why did I spend 3.5 years thinking about front gardens, which are obviously very small spaces that can be quite easily dismissed as insignificant? Well, in the UK, there are about 18 million front gardens, and 1/4 of these are completely paved over. 1/3 of them don't even have a single plant in them, as the one in this picture. And the disappearance of these vegetated front gardens means an increase in impermeable surface area, and it creates a trend when we think of, it creates a higher risk of localized flooding, especially as the climate changes. This is, of course, a worsening trend when we think of building more homes, parking infrastructure changing, so less on-road parking, and the ecological ecosystem services that all of this provides. So this is what I meant by, even though we have green spaces, we seem to be doing the opposite and paving over the front gardens instead of valuing them. Even prior to COVID-19, the health sector was already very strained, with huge challenges in addressing increasingly prevalent mental health issues. The current pandemic is, of course, exacerbating these problems. But even before COVID, as I said, private gardens were the most readily accessible green spaces for residents who had them. This is quite an important thing to note because we know that exposure to nature has beneficial impacts on our well-being. And without even going into the ecological ecosystem services that vegetation provides us, and I'm sure many of you will know about that much more than I do, there is a strong and a growing evidence that access to green space, streetscape greenery, and nature can provide a range of benefits, including improvements in mental, physical, and social health. I'm sure that many of you will have heard of concepts such as forest bathing, which comes from the Japanese tradition, but being in nature is also linked to improved cognitive function, greater relaxation, coping with trauma, and even alleviating certain attention deficit disorder symptoms in children. Conversely, a shortage of green space in local environments has been linked to feelings of loneliness and a lack of social support. There was one study in Ohio, I think it was, that showed that trees were also linked to crime rates. So while we understand many of the ecological benefits of gardens, my study was the first to evaluate front gardens on their health and social impacts. The title of tonight's event is Living with Greenery, but actually I'd like to ask the opposite question. How can we live without greenery? This diagram, which is quite theoretical, but it depicts how individuals' health is embedded at all scales of built, social, and natural environments. Of course, the extent to which all these different layers impact us as individuals will be dependent on context and our own variable risk factors. But essentially, because it's the outermost layer, the natural environment arguably has the most fundamental influence in the provision of potable water, clean air, and food. And the natural environment, of course, will also engender natural disasters and carries pathogens, as we're very much realizing that now. But landscapes that promote good health and restoration from stress and attentional fatigue, they include nature and vegetation in ways that also interact with the built environment, rather than being separate from it. And these healthy landscapes, I think, also promote community building, meaningful work, an active local economy, and healthy lifestyles. So just to demonstrate, that's all very theoretical, but to demonstrate how this might be relevant to each of us in terms of how we relate to our surroundings, I'd like to invite you now to all close your eyes and imagine your favorite place, or a place in which you're often happy if you can't think of a top favorite. And think of who and what you can see. Think of the noises you hear, the scents you smell. Are there any physical sensations? I'll give you a second. Now, okay, so remember that thought, and unless you already happen to be in a street, I'd like now to ask you to imagine yourself in a residential street. Perhaps where you live now or where you've lived previously, where you'd like to live, it doesn't really matter. So now have a think, what can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? And how does it feel compared to your favorite place? Are there any common elements at all, or are they completely different? Okay, so when you're ready, you can open your eyes, and perhaps if some of you might want to write in the chat what the sort of critical components were between your favorite place and the street. Was that something that was missing, or was there a common element or something that was completely, totally different? I'm just going to watch the chat for a second and give you a bit more time. Okay, so we've got 2 people who had trees in common, otherwise very completely different things: bird song, greenery, trees, silence versus street noise, woods. It's quite interesting. It's great to have all of your comments and to see them. Many people's favorite places are either in their homes or outdoors, and many do involve nature somehow, and all the associated sounds, smells, sort of wind and the trees rustling and all that comes with it. The point I'm really trying, thanks all so much for your answers. The point I'm really trying to make is that our environments have a very strong bearing on how we feel and how we go about the world. In a residential street, it is the house frontages that are the dominant factor in defining what the street looks and feels like. And we should be including nature in that vision. Accessing big wild areas, the sorts that probably some of you are thinking that are just completely different to a street, that there's nothing in common. You can't possibly bring, I don't know, the ocean to a street. Those areas aren't necessarily accessible to everybody. In some places, even like Abdallah's mentioned, even public parks can be difficult to access. So nature, where we live, is important. The main aim of my front garden study was to determine if introducing plants to paved front gardens has a positive impact on residents' well-being and perceived stress levels, and if it can improve stress regulation. The theoretical work we build on includes the Kaplan's attention restoration framework and Ulrich's stress reduction theory. Attention restoration is about the ability to concentrate being restored following exposure to natural environments, and stress reduction theory focuses on how natural environments can reduce physiological stress and averse emotions. Together, both of these theories underpin our current understanding of the ways in which exposure is beneficial for our mental and physical health. So we developed an interdisciplinary mixed methods approach surrounding a horticultural intervention that introduced plants to front gardens that were previously paved over. Our experiment evaluated physiological and psychological stress levels before and after adding plants to the bare front gardens. Though it could be almost anywhere in the country, this is a deprived suburb of Salford in Greater Manchester, which is in Northern England. And we picked this street because the terrace housing you can see here is some of the most well-known and iconic housing types in the UK. So like this, especially, these are just a bunch of pictures from the internet. Especially, these homes were especially built in the 19th and 20th centuries during rapid urbanization following the Industrial Revolution and the expansion of mining and textile industries. Today, almost a third of the UK housing stock is this kind of terrace housing, so it's very recognizable across the country. We wanted the results of this study to really resonate with people and to ensure that it felt applicable to normal people with limited means and typical houses. So in May 2017, I added 2 planters with ornamental plants, including petunias, violas, lavender, rosemary, azaleas, clematis, and then either an amelanchier, so a snowy Mespilus tree, or a dwarf juniper tree. The residents could choose which tree they wanted, and they could veto anything. All of these plants were chosen for their ease of maintenance and familiarity to most people in the UK. We also provided the 42 residents with compost, a watering can, a trellis, and the containers you see there, the brown half barrels, are self-watering with a kind of internal wick system. It was a commercial product. The research team did all of the planting to ensure that the gardens were similar. And participants were given advice on how to maintain and water the plants. They were permitted to add anything they wanted, new plants, new features, and they were theirs. They knew we weren't going to take them back after the experiment. So in total, we set up 73 barrel planters, 18 trees, and because we lifted 4 flagstones as well, we had an increase of around 21 square meters of permeable surface area. The participants ranged in age from 21 to 86 years old, and 64% of them were women. So how did we evaluate health and well-being? We used established scales of self-reported measures. The perceived stress scale, for example, measures the degree to which situations in life are considered to be stressful by taking into account feelings of control and the ability to cope with those stresses. We also evaluated participants' physiological stress regulation through outcome measures derived from daily patterns of salivary cortisol, the so-called stress hormone. Finally, interviews allowed us to collect richer qualitative data on subjective well-being and other sociocultural aspects. So I'll just quickly flip through some more images of the gardens, both the before and after the intervention. In this one, you can see that the resident had added quite a few more antirrhinums and other bedding plants. So a key outcome measure of the intervention was that there was a statistically significant mean difference between perceived stress levels at baseline compared to perceived stress levels after the intervention. On a scale from 0 to 40, 40 being the most stressed, there was a decrease of 2.42 points, so that's about 6%, and this was equivalent to a long-term impact of 8 weekly mindfulness sessions from a study in the Netherlands. So that's quite significant considering, it was just 2 planters that were added in a tree. You can see the Amelanchier there. So these reductions in perceived stress were further reinforced by healthier cortisol daily profiles. I'll take some time to explain this first because you may have heard that high cortisol concentrations is equal to high stress. That's not quite the case nor the whole story. Cortisol is indeed the body's main stress response hormone, which can activate our fight or flight response and can regulate sleep and our immune system, our energy levels. We actually need cortisol every day to be healthy. And typically cortisol levels change throughout the day. So you can see in this graph, the x-axis is number of hours after waking up. In normal healthy individuals, concentrations peak as we wake up, and then they taper down to their lowest level at night, ready to go to sleep. It's disturbances to this pattern that indicate that our bodies are under stress. We found that at the beginning of the study, before the plants, only 24% of residents had this healthy daily pattern that was tapering off at night. After the intervention, this increased to 53% of the participants. So this was 3 months after adding the plants, which suggests that they had better mental health and a better stress regulation. So I've now, on this next slide, I added our results for pre-intervention in blue and post-intervention in, opposite way around, pre-intervention in grey and post-intervention in blue. And so following the intervention, you can see both the average concentration of cortisol per day increased by 21% and the total daily secretion also increased. This doesn't sound good if you think that high cortisol equals high stress, but actually they increased from levels that were too low before. Blunted cortisol levels below reference ranges are linked to depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and suicide attempts through the downregulation of our central stress response system. after prolonged exposure to chronic stress. So these blue values of post-intervention were higher and closer to the healthy reference range as shown by the green line. Hope that makes sense to everyone. It's not the most simple of topics. So the intervention also impacted the residents personally. I'll go through some of the interviews now to kind of explain how these physiological changes might have actually looked like in people's lives. And the emergent themes from the interviews that I conducted after the plantings included the motivation to plant more, to renovate, to repair like other parts of their home, to touch up various aspects of the house, both indoors and outdoors. Some people got very motivated to look at their back garden. It gave people the energy and the push to do more things generally. It was an encouraging responsibility to have to take care of the plants. Another theme was that it was very relaxing seeing the plants coming home to them. So this was when people were still leaving their houses quite regularly and watching them grow. It gave many people a sense of pride in the home, in the area, and it gave them a sense of achievement in keeping the plants alive. It made many of them house proud, and this was an area where people didn't necessarily have that pride in their community, in their area. The planters became an indicator of care and a booster to show more care for the home and area. It was, for some people, it was a conversation starter between neighbours. There was one street where there were two, not direct neighbours, but 2 doors away from each other. They had both been living on that street for 10 years, never seen each other. And then one fine day, they both had an amalanke in their garden and they were comparing their trees. They didn't become best friends, but at least, you know, they knew of each other and they could recognize each other the next time they saw each other. It also made participants feel brighter in themselves, more cheerful. It was an internal pick-me-up. They had better moods going out in the morning and coming home in the evenings. And one thing that many people said to me was that they really perked up when they saw the first shoots of spring after a long winter. So that was the snowdrop bulbs, galanthus. And in general, I think it speaks a great deal that there was no negative feedback. There was no, and we did ask, there was no undesired, indirect or direct consequences. Amazingly, nothing was stolen, nothing was vandalized, no plants died. And as many of you will know, I don't think that any of that can be taken for granted in a real life intervention. I haven't been back to Salford in a while, but they were still, or the planters were all still there in February 2020. So that's 3 years on from when we put them in. And when the study was published in October, I contacted many of the residents. Well, I contacted all of them to let them know the study had been published. And many of them came back and emailed me about how the planters were still going strong. So to conclude, I think our study shows that domestic gardens and green front gardens are not a dispensable luxury, especially at a time where most of us are spending the majority of our time at home and concerned about our physical and mental health. It was so telling to hear Abdallah's comment just now that one of his participants didn't remember the sensation of green space, and that she said that for her it was a luxury to go to green space, that she had to concentrate on feeding her family. And I think that's, of course, the situation for many people, but it's so sad that that's the situation, and that we should really be pushing for green space to be an essential rather than a luxury. And so in that sense, the role of private gardens and the horticulture, landscape and arboricultural industries really need to push that and demonstrate the essential role of delivering natural capital that also improves our health and well-being. I hope that this might help policymakers at local levels to make more informed decisions about the value of gardens and future housing developments and front garden paving regulations, but also health policies. So looking at social prescriptions of gardening in the same way that general practitioners, doctors may prescribe physical activity to a patient. I believe that it's too easy to build unhealthy environments, if you think back about that diagram, where we're not including nature in our everyday landscapes. And while, of course, lifestyle decisions as individuals or on the scale of the household will have important effects for us as individuals and as households, actually what we need is a continued and galvanized integrated thinking between the environmental green space and the health sectors, for example. I think that urban area authorities really should be discouraging hard surfacing and paving over of front gardens. Residents shouldn't be encouraged to easily increase impermeable surface areas in their gardens, which is the case in the UK. I don't know what it's like in all the countries where you're in. And when regulating on new residential developments, vegetated and permeable front gardens should be favoured. England has a new tree strategy. So there's a pledge to plant an additional 75,000 acres of trees a year, I think. And that's now being taken forward in a consultation that's currently taking place. And many bodies are recognising that the importance of planting trees is important not just in woodlands, not just in places that are in rural areas, but also that the trees in domestic gardens and in streets will contribute significantly to achieving those targets. And for that, we really need to be able to communicate what this might mean for residents and the benefits that they can get from that. I think that within the arboricultural sector, which I don't really know much of, but I'm so glad that there are so many of you here this evening that are listening today, so that you can have an idea on how important your trees can be to boosting people's well-being, and that you can find a strong justification to push your role in initiatives to encourage the equitable exposure to plants, to include people who wouldn't otherwise have this opportunity. So of course, if you're rich and wealthy and have a big garden with lots of trees, good for you. But we really do also need to include people who are disabled, unemployed, socially isolated, in poor physical or mental health, or otherwise marginalized. And people who fall in these categories stand to gain significantly from being exposed to trees and plants in their front gardens, in their communities, and in their daily living spaces. So I think really, yeah, greenery shouldn't be an afterthought, but really a priority in everything that we're doing. And yeah, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and ideas on how this might be kind of best implemented across sectors. I think that's one thing that I've found the most intangible, where sometimes language is different, the sort of technical jargon and vocabulary is different, so people don't necessarily understand each other. And that is something that at the RHS we are really trying to push forward, to get people to understand that really this is just a win-win-win situation. I think that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lauriane. There's so much of all of what you said I agree with, but particularly that your conclusion there, I was nodding away there. I think you're absolutely right. Okay, Abdallah, if you want to come back, we can't have lost you. There he is. I should say, on a slightly lighter note, that during the chat, I'm sure some of you were just diligently paying attention, but during the chat, karaoke was mentioned, and I'm quite partial to a bit of karaoke. And Matthew said that he's trying to think of tree-related songs, and I'm quite disappointed that more of you haven't tried to think of tree-related songs in the chat. So there's a challenge: who can come up with the best tree-related song? Okay, lots and lots of questions. Abdallah, a couple of people interested in soil and how you work with soil in your project. Jackie said, how do you address the issue of soil? Phil has asked a similar question, and he's sort of expanded it a bit and said, is there scope to use composting to make your own soil? What can you tell us about that?
Actually, we don't prefer using soil on rooftop gardens, especially in informal areas, because as you might know, the soil is compact, it's heavy in weight. So we prefer to utilize substrate, which is more light in weight and probably easier for people to put in planters. So in this case, you will definitely ask, how do the plants get the nutrients? Since substrates are usually like cocoa coir or perlite, they are still like neutral materials. So we ask them to fertigate either by adding some compost to this mixture or by utilizing liquid nutrient solution. So this kind of mixture is good for the weights on the roof, since we're in different setting, and it's not very welcome to put lots of weights on the roof, especially in informal areas. So this is answering the soil. So basically we don't use soil, we use substrate, cocoa peat and perlite, which is a very good mix. Sometimes we add sand as well to this mixture, depending on what we're planting. And we used to fertigate using either compost to this mixture, or we utilize liquid nutrient solution. For composting, I think like doing compost at the locations, I think this was an idea that was discussed in one of the trainings, and actually basics of composting was introduced to the teachers so that they can utilize any kind of food surplus that is available in the kitchen of the school, and creating a compost tumbler where they can just try as much as they can to utilize this kind of compost in their urban gardening activities.
Very interesting, thank you. I think that might actually answer another question that Jackie put in, which was what challenges were there in addressing the extra weight for the rooftop gardens, and how were they addressed? And by the sounds of it, that was addressed by trying to just make it as lightweight as possible by avoiding soil.
Exactly, yes.
There you go, Jackie. You asked if we go through the Q&A. You've had 2 questions in one there, so there you go. Okay, thank you. Now, where's a question that I liked? Oh, it's from Matthew again. Question for you, Lauriane. How long will you be following the residents up for in these gardens? Is there a danger that they'll lose interest after the study is complete? I think that's a really good question. We sometimes just focus on when the sort of exciting bit's happening and then we all go away. What happens for the longer term?
So I started interacting with these people in about January 2017, did the intervention in May 2017. We actually, something that I didn't explain in the presentation, had a control group. So we had 2 different groups that did the intervention in 2 goes. So half of them had the gardens in May 2017, the other half in May 2018. So it's kind of like a waiting list design to be able to statistically control for all of that. And so we followed all of these people for a year, where I did interviews and questionnaires with them every 3 months over the course of a year. So beyond that, and that was unfortunately the scope of the research project, I don't really know, and I won't be following them up more than that. They agreed for that amount of time. But as I said, I do know that they are all still there at the moment. Whether or not they're as interested, who knows? Maybe there was a part of novelty factor, but at least I know that it didn't just last 6 months or something. It did last longer than that. And just another comment, that it did have a knock-on effect on some of the neighbours who were interested. So I think particularly those people who got some more plants themselves, who initially didn't sign up to our experiment, they were interested. And I think that kind of knock-on effect probably goes some length to show that the interest can be kept, at least for the midterm.
Thank you very much, Lauriane. Yeah, interesting. I hope that it's going to be maybe similar trials other places. I've drifted into my own question there, sorry, but is this something that maybe other places could follow up on and do their own trials on? Is there any talk of trying this maybe around the world? It'd be fascinating to hear different perspectives, sort of culturally, I suppose, around the world. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, in terms of the plants that we chose, they were, of course, UK sort of climate, easy maintenance in the UK climate. But the containers that we got were commercial products. It's quite modular. So as you could see, the front gardens were very small. You could just kind of put 1, put 2, put 3. And I think there's definitely something that could be replicated. And that would be great if someone wants to do that. Yeah.
I think that the same question as well, actually, is what I was going to ask Abdallah next, because a couple of people have asked, let me see if I can find them. Phil's asked whether any neighbours have been motivated to copy the rooftop gardening concept, and other people as well. Sorry, I've lost some of them now, but several people basically asking, is it rolling out across other rooftops in Cairo? I'd like to ask, are there other cities in Egypt or anywhere else who is taking up this concept too?
Yes, actually, people are very interested. Like whenever we were implementing other projects elsewhere, we were always like invited by people to come and check the roof. Like people from adjacent buildings tell us, hey, we also might think of having a green roof. Why don't you come and check our roofs? So probably people are starting to get the idea and get the benefits behind it. But we face the issue of funding. Like this is always the issue. So if you're specifically talking to this specific strata that usually are very sensitive to any kind of investment that might be a bit not easy for them. So in this case, you must come with a plan and a fund. But of course, they're welcoming the idea. They think it's brilliant. People are starting to think that, okay, this might have very good benefits on our communities. And so the idea is expanding, but in their minds. So the implementation usually requires funding. So this is always the issue, because of course planting in the ground is not as expensive as planting on the roof, where you have to think of how can you, for example, provide people with a source of water. How can you create planters from scratch? How can you create an irrigation and drainage network? So this always consumes more money compared to just ground agriculture or ground planting, which is somehow less costly compared to this intervention.
I think money is the problem everywhere for every project any of us are ever trying to do. So I think we share that. We share that globally, definitely. Somebody's commenting that I'm smirking when I saw the song titles come in. I was, but the main person who made me laugh so far is I've just lost it. How have I lost this? From Meg. 99 problems, but a beach ain't one. That's my personal favorite at the moment. Can you beat Meg? Right. Sorry, back to business. I really shouldn't have asked that question. It's very distracting. Where was I going to go next? Now I've completely lost it. Sheila makes more of a comment, really, Lauriane, I think, than a question. But the planning has a role to play by not allowing entire driveways and front gardens to be paved over. Have you got any thoughts on how the planning system maybe could be used? There's a big planning consultation going on now, as you said. How can we use the infrastructure available to us to stop this from happening?
To be honest, I'm not too sure, because there are some regulations in place, but they're just impossible to enforce. Because if someone paves over their front garden, so they are allowed to pave it over with permeable products. But I mean, just to an untrained eye, what does that look like? I think it'll be quite difficult, and I personally wouldn't want to get to a place where we're sort of policing our neighbours. But I think it's really about getting the planning. So I don't have any practical kind of solutions. If anyone does, that would be absolutely great. But what I do know is that it would be about getting the planning sector to really understand that and to value it, to be able to encourage permeable planting and permeable front gardens in a way that's more just, I think currently it's just like a link to potential other solutions you can do. It doesn't actually dissuade you from submitting your planning application.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a joined up approach, isn't it? I think to change everything. And as long as everyone loves their cars and isn't going to park on the street, then they're going to be paving over to.
I mean, some people need to park their cars. That's absolutely understandable, because there's less on-road parking. Generally, it's the people who are less well off actually who really depend on the cars. But I think it's also about understanding that having a car and a permeable front garden with plants in isn't mutually exclusive. There are plenty of designs that you can have both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Abdallah, you mentioned financing. If I was any good at this, I'd have mentioned this question at the time, but we'll do it now. We'll edit it all together later. Naomi has said, and hi Naomi, by the way. Naomi said, hi Abdallah, the project's come a long way since we spoke. Where we left off, financing was an issue, and Naomi's wondering if the partners that have joined up with you are providing enough financing to maintain what you started, but also to expand it at all.
I think I've met Naomi in Italy during the event that we were in together, and we've been in touch. So I think my answer to your question is that for the time being, no. Like some grants provide people with funding for a specific time, and then they give them the specific tools on how to maybe operate, maintain, and sustain the activities. But reality is different. Like when you implement, you sometimes face technical difficulties. You have issues. You have to purchase new equipment that might be costly. So it's in reality, it's different. Of course, it requires funding support from different partners. Whoever is interested to support, of course, is welcome. But we try to, in terms of sustainability, we try to focus this chat with the entities themselves. So if, for example, we're dealing with a school, so we try to talk with the school administration and try to convince them one way or another that they have to provide some sort of a financial support for this kind of activity in order to be sustained. It depends, of course, on the priorities. So it's not easy to convince them with this kind of activity, but still, this is the way it happens. We try to support them individually. Sometimes I visit those schools on just personal basis. Just I go and check and give them support and provide them with some seeds. But for the time being, this is one of the challenges. Like grants ends in terms of time and money. So this is, and then they're on their own. So this is the challenge that we face.
I kind of feel like this is almost a potential to link up the two projects you've been talking about, whether you can use a project like you're doing in Cairo, Abdallah, but using the same monitoring and metrics as Lauriane's been using to demonstrate the mental health benefits and the improvements in, for example, the education of the children in schools. We know these links exist to sort of play off one another.
I think that the main key for this is awareness and education. If you raise more awareness about the benefits, probably more stakeholders will be involved. Probably more decision makers will be interested to support. Probably more people from the private sector will support these projects. So we try as much as we can to raise awareness, talk in every event, tell people that this is beneficial for everyone. So I guess exposure is also important. We try to talk about these projects everywhere, so that people get the idea and try to disseminate this concept one way or another.
Well, hopefully a few more people are learning about it tonight, hopefully. Sorry, I'm smiling again because it's gone. Daniel, love you. Daniel's submitted Motorhead and Ace of Spades. Oh, Daniel, I see what you did there. Brilliant. Right. So I wish I hadn't asked that now because I'm really distracted. Okay, Lauriane. A question from Anthony. We can't have a webinar without a question from Anthony. Anthony saying, how to defend a small front garden that I call rewilded, but which the neighbours insult as derelict. Weeds are often more valuable to biodiversity than cultivated plants, but they and I have a fight against the human necessity for neatness to ensure psychological comfort. Now, I've never seen Anthony's garden, and I only know Anthony through these webinars, but if I had to paint a picture of your garden, Anthony, it's like that. So, Lauriane, how do we, it's education, I guess, again, isn't it?
I mean, this really reminds me of a study that was done by a colleague, someone called Helen Hoyle. She was looking at the perception of wildflower meadows, so not necessarily exactly weeds, but very messy, wild looking. I think her project was in Luton in the UK, and what she found was that people didn't like it. The local people to where this wildflower meadow had been planted to encourage pollinators was not appreciated. However, once she stuck up a sign, just a little sort of board that said, this is on purpose, it's not been neglected, It's not that the council are trying to scrimp on budget and not mow the lawn. It's because we're encouraging pollinators and other wildlife. It will look different over the seasons. They will be more colourful. Yes, there is a period of the year where it's kind of got to be cut back and it doesn't necessarily look its best, but it is absolutely intentional and the bees love it. People suddenly loved it. So I think it really is about communication, education, and explaining what the intention is.
Yeah. I agree. I've mentioned this before in webinars, but in the Stonehouse Community Arboretum here, we've been letting some areas grow wilder for biodiversity. And we put the little signs in, the blue heart signs, as sort of a campaign with the blue hearts that just says these areas are being managed for biodiversity. So it's explaining this is active management, not neglect. So that's the way we've tried to go. Not our idea, we've taken it from other people. Abdallah, there's a question I wanted to ask. Nobody's asked it, so I'm going to, because one of the things that I found most inspiring about your project when I heard about it the first time was this requirement you had for the gender split to be sort of at least 50% female engaged in these projects. And you did mention it in your presentation, but I was wondering if you could maybe expand a little bit more about it, because that seems to be a really important part of this project.
Yes, actually, we stressed on this when we were working on our selection criteria, because unfortunately, in some informal settlements, we find lots of women with no jobs, with no hobbies, where they're just housewives who are probably not doing things. So we thought that part of this can be to support those women, especially in informal areas. So we want this idea, of course, to be expanded among everyone. So youth is also part of what we want to focus on. But at the same time, we thought that we have to focus on women, because probably women and informal settlements is like there's sensitivity here, like issues, lots of issues in terms of dealing with men, and in terms of working, and in terms of hobbies, in terms of daily activities. So we decided that this can be some sort of a way to empower women there and provide them with new hobbies or ideas. And this actually propagated not only through the idea of picking a school for girls, was to think of how can we propagate this impact not only for the teachers, but beyond this to the girls, to the students as well. So this was also a component that we wanted to focus on very much, and try to use it as a tool to empower women in informal settlements of Cairo.
I think it's a really inspirational part of it. Just again, sorry everyone, this is just a conversation between me and Abdallah now. I'm interested. Did you get any pushback at all from either the community leaders or members of the community against this being something that empowered women?
No, I don't think so. On the contrary, actually, we had more than 50% attendees of women. So we didn't feel like there was a pushback for this. Like, people were fine with it. Probably some even male members thought that this is a good idea for some housewives who don't have jobs. Or maybe he thought that maybe my wife, if she doesn't work, maybe she can do this as a business next to her, like normal day-to-day activities with her children. So some males also thought of it in a proper way. So they thought that this might be an idea to support their wives at home.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's interesting. I mean, Lauriane, you mentioned the importance of engaging sort of disadvantaged communities. So luckily, not so much women in Sheffield necessarily. But how did you go about engaging the disadvantaged communities? Did you find any gender differences, particularly in the studies that you were doing as well?
I mean, my engagement process was literally knocking on doors. So I tried to actually not take that into account. But one problem that we did face was that people who were more vulnerable were very understandably much more skeptical about my plan. You know, I turned up on their doorstep with a clipboard and was offering to give them some free plants in exchange for answering my questions. I think I would have thought it was a scam. But I mean, we persevered, and that's how we got the 42 people. But one problem we did face was that there were people who were very vulnerable. For example, one lady who had various health issues, which meant that I didn't confidently feel that she could consent properly. So we had to exclude her from the experiment because it was research, whereas I do think that she would have benefited a lot from it. So I think, I mean, we faced that kind of slightly different ethical challenge there because of the research context. There were also, because we knew we wanted to really keep as many people as possible for the duration of the research project, anybody who told me they thought they might not be staying in their homes for at least 2 years, we sort of stayed away streets where populations were more likely to be transitory, which in Salford are more likely to be in a worse off socioeconomic position. So we definitely did face challenges, and I don't really have the answer, but I think that something that's much more community focused, like Abdallah's project, where really that is the whole goal of engaging with people, could have happened, but not necessarily in the context where we were really just trying to get our numbers as high as possible to be able to show a statistically significant change. But I think that would be something that, at least personally, is a big barrier to these kinds of research. And I think that's also why a lot of research does focus on rich participants who are able to participate. So that is definitely a limitation, yeah.
Interesting. No one ever knocks on my door offering me free plants in exchange for questions, by the way, but there we go. Thank you, Lauriane. Where are we? So we're definitely not going to be able to get through all these questions, folks, but we always make sure that all of the chat and all of the questions goes out to both of our panelists, and they can respond in their own time, or come through me at john@trees.org.uk if you like. So we'll make sure they all get there. Abdallah, a question that has come up several times is about water in your project, and there's different variants on the question. I'll throw a couple at you. Ian has asked, to what extent can grey water from the residences be used to irrigate the rooftop farm? And Andre has said, if water is so scarce in Cairo, how do you find the resources to create water farming?
Okay, first point, grey water. It's an excellent idea. It's very good in terms of water efficiency. We thought about it, but the problem is that it adds to the initial investment, to the initial cost of the system. So you need a proper filtering system in order to be able to utilize grey water. Fortunately, in Egypt, like grey and black water, grey and normal water are just separated, so you can have an access to grey water and refilter it. But adding a filtering system might require a technology, and might require proper testing for the water, especially if you're using for edible crops. So I guess it is, in theory, it's a very good idea. It adds to water efficiency, but at the same time, we have to think about the economics, because dealing also with such projects, we want to try as much as possible to minimize the cost. So adding a grey water filtering system might somehow add value, add an extra cost on the system. Regarding the second part, water is available. We are connected. Like in Cairo, it's not, the water is generally scarce, but it is connected. It is available. Like you can definitely find in all informal settlements are connected to the main water network. So water is available, so they can use it. But in general, in Egypt, it is a scarce resource. However, we try as much as we can if we want also to, maybe people are not fully aware of this issue. So we try as much as possible to raise awareness. So whenever we do any kind of workshop, we tell them that, hey, we use this type of techniques like hydroponics, which saves lots and lots of water by recycling. And we use also drip irrigation techniques, which also supports the rationalization of water use in agriculture. So this is our means on how to try and convince and talk to the community about the issue of water. But in theory, in Cairo, everyone is connected to water, so it is available.
Thanks, Abdallah. Lauriane, someone's asked a question along the same lines, which I think was aimed at you, about from Adam. Do you teach recycling techniques from natural rainfall or domestic water supply on your projects? Obviously, the plants need watering. Do you give them any assistance in terms of sustainable water management?
We didn't really have to. I mean, there was one concern when people were, in the process of signing up for our research study, was people thought that their water bills might be going up because they had to water the plants. Because of the fact that we did this in Salford, where it is very, very, very wet, I think over the course of those 2 years, there were maybe 2 weeks where it didn't rain. So other than that, we were pretty confident that the plants would be absolutely fine without any sort of mains watering, other than in those very dry periods. And that was also because the containers that we gave them were so they had I can't remember if it was 22-litre reservoir at the bottom. So about half of the height of the barrel was actually a water reservoir with a wicking system that would bring the water up to the compost. So we didn't actually have that as an issue at all in this study, but definitely if it were to be done in other places, that would of course be an important consideration. And in the RHS, we do have a water management specialist who just she's so good at communicating these ideas of having she's called Janet Manning. She's got lots of tips in terms of water butts and changing the flow of your irrigation systems and all that that are very easily done at home and don't necessarily require expensive tools and things like that. So I think that's definitely something that the RHS does promote in the last couple of years. But yeah, we didn't have to do that in this particular study.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've got time for maybe one more question each, and then we'll finish up. I'm going to steal another question to Abdallah, I'm afraid, because I find it very interesting. You said at the beginning of your presentation about green space being seen as the sort of least important usage of space in Cairo, and I found that really interesting because in some of the time I've been around different places in the world, I've felt like in the sort of hotter, more arid countries, perhaps they appreciate trees a little bit more because they can feel so clearly the benefits of the shade, if nothing else, that they create. You sort of instinctively, I'd feel that in somewhere like Cairo, people would understand that these green spaces are actually doing a lot for them.
Yes, this is like total. It makes sense. It's totally understandable for everyone. But the problem is that we try to raise awareness about this, and we try to raise awareness about other benefits of trees, of public trees. But the problem is the government is concerned with more issues. Like, for example, they're focusing on, for the time being, they're focusing on how to overcome the traffic issues. So they're one-minded. They're just thinking of doing this, and without even thinking of other things that might have a positive impact on people. So yes, of course, it makes total sense. We want to raise awareness about this. So our role here is to try as much as we can to quantify the lost benefits of those trees that are daily removed from the streets and converted into asphalt, and tell people and tell decision makers that those trees costed you not only the money that you just used to remove it, but it cost you lots and lots of other money in other ways. So we hope that we focus more on education and awareness, and we try to raise our voice as much as possible and push this idea through either urban farming or urban gardening on roofs, or supporting public trees. And we try as much as we can to talk to the decision makers and the government officials and try to convince them that this approach has been done in several places and it's not successful, and it will cause them a lot of trouble in the future. So this is our hopes, that we work on raising awareness and educating people.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, last question then for you, Lauriane, before we do our very final question, of course. Ian asked another good question, as he so often does. you talked about green prescriptions, you mentioned it in your presentation. And Ian asks if there's any potential for a small proportion of community health spending to be directed towards front garden planters. He asked, for example, was the health board for Salford involved in any way? Do you see this being the start of something where actually NHS funding or community health funding is spent on this kind of intervention?
So it's very hard because all of these pots of money are becoming more and more strapped. But I think that the NHS is starting to recognise this. Not necessarily, it's the rogue sort of clinical commissioning groups and all that are getting this for the moment. But in the NHS long-term plan that came out a couple of years ago, there was a recognition for the long-term benefits of preventative health interventions. And there they really did highlight social prescriptions. So I think that's starting to come into play, and it will do in the next couple of years, hopefully. I think that the problem with these different pots of money is that, A, these people don't speak to each other yet, or maybe are only really beginning to build relationships and build trust between them. And the other issue is that everyone's just competing for the same pots of money without necessarily the recognition that they could be doing one thing together with that same pot of money that really is a what's the word, a sort of synergy between the two, because everyone has to really justify their own spending to meet their own strategic goals and all that, which don't necessarily at this stage overlap.
So unfortunately, again, the problem sounds like money. It's the same problem I had was going Cairo and as you got in Sheffield. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much to both of you. Right, one last question. It's my favourite question, and I'm going to go to Abdallah first. We like to ask our speakers, what is your favourite book? We normally say about trees, but I think we've got a slightly different answer today. So Abdallah, please.
I think my favorite book for the time being is Understanding Cairo, A Logic of a City Out of Control. It is by David Sims. He's a famous economist, and I think it helped me a lot, and it would probably help everyone to get to understand how the city is growing and how do we deal with it. So I invite everyone to take a look at this book, and if you understand Cairo, please let me know, because it's still a journey for me for the time being.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. People always ask, can we put the links in? And the links will go on, the books will go under the finished presentation when it's on our YouTube channel. Lauriane.
Yeah, so mine is actually a fiction book that I've got here. It's called The Garden of Evening Mists by Tan Tueng En. It's my favorite book. It's set in current day Malaysia, but at the time it was Malaya in the 1950s, so during the Japanese occupation, which is quite an untold part of the Second World War. But what I love about it is that the garden in question, so it's a Japanese designed garden in the highlands of Malaysia. So it completely contrasts with the trees of the jungle all around it. It really gets into ideas of the contrast between the wild jungle and the very, very manicured Japanese garden. And the garden itself is almost the main character of the book. Not quite, but you don't understand it at the beginning, it develops, and then you really get to see all the sort of contradictory positions, and it's fantastic historical fiction. Yeah. And I forgot to put my last slide in my presentation, but I've put my email address in the chat if anyone does want to contact me.
Thank you very much. And as we always say, you can email me, john@trees.org.uk, and I can put you in contact with our presenters, or at least forward your communication onto them. Well, thank you both so much. That was really great. it was genuinely inspirational projects, and I think they're fantastic, and I hope they're taken up in other places, and I hope more people know about them. Thank you all for watching, as always, but also particularly thank you for your tree-related songs, which I feel like should be some kind of feature going forward. I need to think about that a bit. I'm torn for a winner between Living in a Box from Terry, Ace of Spades from Daniel, 99 Problems But the Beach Ain't One from Meg. But I think I like Matthew's effort of "I Will Always Love You." I think that's very nice. We'll work on this as a feature. So thank you both. You are both brilliant. Thank you to all of our audience. Thank you to the whole team here, as always. Please register for next week's webinar. Hope to see you again next week. Women in Arboriculture event tomorrow. Loads of other things on our website, trees.org.uk. Stay safe, and hopefully we will see you very soon. Thank you very much. Good night.